studies that were submitted, we lumped them into 3 different categories. We found some themes that came up when people submitted their case studies. The first one was access. The second is attendance or absences and issues related around those items. And then there were some that were just miscellaneous. We are hoping to be able to get, like Trudy said, to as many as possible today. But without further ado, go ahead and start with our first question or case study that was submitted. And this was related to access. What might be the best practices for accommodating students with service animals in high-risk exposure programs, such as cosmetology, dental programs, and/or chemistry programs? So the way we're going to do this is some of our advisory board members are going to try to answer these questions first, and then we'll open up the floor. I just ask that people will raise their hands so we aren't talking over one another if they have questions related to this. But I believe Renee, if she's here, was going to try to address this one first.
So I think one of the most important things is just looking into the program and what's, how it's set up, some of the safety, making sure the animal and all the students are safe, and making those determinations on those high risk exposure areas. And it can look different for each one of those. Any other thoughts?
So I would also venture to say that I think it may depend on what service the animal is providing and determining if that individual is an otherwise qualified individual to meet that particular standard and with those accommodations, and what does that look like?
Bruce, I think I saw your hand raised. Did you have an additional comment? Any other questions related to best practices for accommodating students with service animals in these high-risk exposure programs? Any questions related to that? Okay, Eric, yes.
Well, I guess I would just wonder, what is the concern primarily for the animal? And I just, given the nature of it, I assume so. So if that's the case, provided it's not something to do with the need for the dog to be there or pet to be there for vision purposes, then it's probably good for, just to encourage the student to find a place in the lab or wherever this might be and kind of identify that as their spot. If being right next to the student is dangerous, or risk spilling chemicals on it and things like that. So
Bruce, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think I got the right connection now. I just wanted to mention that there may also be the need to educate the owner of the emotional support or the service animal as well too, to the environment that the animal is going to be placed in. So sometimes folks wouldn't think about getting protective foot coverings for their service animal in a chemistry lab and that type of thing too.
Excellent point there.
I saw Laura have her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add kind of what Bruce said. You might want to have a conversation with the instructor of that particular program or the dean or director to know what type of chemicals or what type of environment the student and the service animal is going to be in, because that will give you a better understanding of whether or not the animal should be there. If it's a service animal that might be trained to pick up items, are they going to pick up something or some kind of chemical or something that's in the lab? So those are some questions you want to, ask before the class starts with the instructor, and maybe go over with the student to see if, there's a place the service animal can be placed during certain lab experiments or lab procedures.
Okay, I think we'll move on to our next access-related case study. You have a student who is blind and wants to attend your college. The student will need to navigate between multiple buildings for classes. You are an office of one, and the student is requesting a guide to help navigate your campus and a mentor/tutor to assist with coursework. The student has a caseworker from the Division of Services for the Blind, but this person will not provide such support services. However, this agency is sponsoring the tuition and fees for the student. Is it appropriate for the DS office to assist the student in navigating the campus, i.e. finding classrooms, restrooms, etc.? And how about assisting with mentoring/tutoring services for each course?
Okay, so I said I would take this one on. And so when we think about utilizing external services like Services for the Blind, normally they have what's called an orientation and mobility instructor that can provide that navigation assistance for a student, right? And so the fact that they won't provide that either says to me that they don't have an orientation and mobility specialist at the time, or maybe that caseworker is newer and they're not aware that their orientation and mobility specialist does those types of things. So it could be one of two things. So I would either, double check with Services for the Blind because they normally have orientation and mobility specialists that would help a student with navigating a campus. Now, if that agency happens to not have an orientation mobility specialist available, then we as my thoughts in terms of as disability services providers, we need to make sure we're providing access to the classroom for that student. And so would we look into possibly like we would do American Sign Language interpreter, would we seek out services for an orientation and mobility instructor for this student, right? For our campus to make sure that the student has that type of access to around the campus. And so seeking out that type of service for this student. There have been recommendations from other disability services providers who've had a similar situation where they said from their legal team that it is not a good idea that we ourselves do that type of work unless we've been trained in it specifically, meaning like walking to the student to class, things like that. I've known other service providers disability service professionals who have, like, before classes start, they'll walk them around to show them where classes are, like that one good time, but not on an everyday basis, right? So that's something to think about when it comes to that in terms of navigating the campus. And then in terms of assisting with mentoring and tutoring services, my thoughts are that tutoring services are available for all students on a campus. And so my thought would be that as long as there's the accessible technology through the tutoring portion of the campus, then there should not be any problem with the student accessing tutoring just like any other student would. So it's really more of a question of access, and as long as your college is accessible to the student, then you're doing okay. Any other additions or thoughts that anybody would like to add?
I would like to add, because this actually happened on my campus. This is Alfreda. This particular student was from South Carolina. And so I did reach out, to the disability Services for the Blind and was told that they could not provide that service to him because he was out of state and they couldn't cross state lines. So they recommended that I reach out to the Division for the Blind in North Carolina. So I did reach out to the Division for North Carolina, and they essentially said, oh, this student is out of state. We can't serve them because they're in South Carolina. The student basically came to our college because the program that he wanted was not offered at the community college in his county where he lives, his state where he lived, which is why he was here. So essentially, neither party, neither state was willing to provide that accommodation, even though, the Services for the Blind in South Carolina did provide his tuition and fees and that sort of work. But I was basically told that he's on your campus and you had to provide that accommodation to him. And so I did. Basically, like you mentioned before, give him a tour a couple of days before. So he did come out and I walked him around and, gave him a tour of the campus, specifically his classrooms. And then I also put on my schedule to meet him every day that his mom dropped him off. I did it for about 2 weeks to where I made sure that he got to his classroom and back to her car after class. And as far as the tutoring, what he was looking for, it wasn't necessarily tutoring. It was more or less he needed someone to be in class with him because the program that he was in, which was a broadcasting audio production program. And so they were using this software that was not accessible, Adobe something with Adobe. And so it couldn't read, even though we provided JAWS for him, which is what he's familiar with. It didn't read everything. So we essentially needed someone in class with him. And I did end up hiring a student who had previously taken that course to kind of sit in and kind of assist with that student. So was able to describe some things to him, also assist him with the technology that wouldn't read, that JAWS couldn't read to him, would read to him. But he came and he got his certificate. He did graduate with his certificate. But I just thought it was very overwhelming and consumed a lot of my time, making sure that I was there for him when he needed to make sure that he got to his classroom or needed to go to the restroom or wanted to have a break but we got through it. And I assisted him, of course, with graduation. So we walked across the stage together and that would happen.
Can I
Clear
ask
to
a
say
question?
something? Is it okay to respond?
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I was waiting for you to call on me.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Bruce, I know you've already kind of commented to me and gave me some recommendations.
Well, first of all, and I'm going to try to be diplomatic, but sometimes I'm not. All right. The sentence, however, the agency is sponsoring tuition and fees.
Yes.
And you also clarified that the program the student wanted to take was not available in their immediate home state.
Yes.
Somebody's doing a Pontius Pilate here and washing their hands of their part in the responsibility here. All right. If they agreed to sponsor him and provide resources and fiscal support at the college, they should have also made arrangements for his navigation and his mobility. All right. And they could have coordinated that because professional office to office, they could have coordinated that with an office here in North Carolina as well, too. I have been doing this a very, very long time, and I don't usually like to use the word, but when I see a situation like this, sometimes I help the student appreciate what CAP stands for,
Yeah.
the Client Assistance Program, because they have rights as far as what they're entitled to by the agency that is supporting them. I appreciate all the wonderful things you did, But you know, we get into, as an institution, we get into a slippery slope of potential liability. I have seen,
Right.
I have seen colleagues over the years who well-intentioned, for instance, wanted to transfer an individual out of their wheelchair and they've broken their legs
Right.
because they weren't trained to do it.
Exactly. I had no clue what I was doing, but just trying to describe everything that was around him,
Yeah.
you know, how many steps to take. I mean, he was my first student who was visually impaired, completely blind, that I've ever worked with since being here. And it's been like 11 years. And so he was my very first. So I was just out there.
And I'm sure you
Scrounging.
did a wonderful job, okay?
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
just
he still
saying,
calls me
as
to
a
this day.
representative of the
Yeah.
institution, if
Yeah.
something had happened, or they
Yeah.
came back and said, well, I didn't get what I needed, or, you know, what the college did wasn't, you know, what I needed. We all know Judy. We also know other folks at OCR and whatever, and those types of things. I'm just saying that sometimes well-intentions can be difficult too.
Mhm.
And I'm a full advocate for the student, but appropriately advocating too.
Yeah.
So that's
I
my
totally
soapbox.
agree. Yeah. I agree. I was right there. Especially when I couldn't get any support from anybody. I kept calling and pleading. He had a caseworker, but she just said she couldn't help in that aspect.
The quality of support and the extent of support you get, and I say this as nicely as I can again, varies not only from office to office, but from individual counselor to individual counselor. And
Yeah.
I, being an optimist, and I'm always an optimist, you have an opportunity to further educate them too.
Yeah.
I saw a hand raise, Eric.
Eric, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thought I clicked it. So where did you originally reach out to? Did you have a listing of who should be the mobility specialist?
No, I didn't have a list. I essentially called when him and his mom made me aware of his caseworker. I had some conversation with her and I was asking for that guidance. Who do you all have that can assist him navigate our campus? And she said, well, he's in North Carolina and we don't have anybody that can come to North Carolina to assist in that area. And I'm like, so what am I supposed to do here? What recommendations do you have? And she's the one that recommended that I contact the Vision for the Blind. She actually gave me somebody's name to reach out to in North Carolina. And so I called him and explained the situation. And he's like, yeah, we don't see him in our system. And I said, well, he's in South Carolina. And he said, oh, well, we can't serve him because he's a South Carolina resident.
So does South Carolina have a listing kind of like we do? Because I know there's a listing at the division level.
I think so, because he made some phone calls on my behalf. He did, so let me reach out and see if somebody else, I know somebody else that could do that for you. But no, I got nobody.
I just know me, I'd be banging down doors.
Yeah. I mean, but it was, the student, he kind of come a little late. Well, I'm not going to say late. He probably approached me 2 to 3 weeks before classes started that semester and said that he had heard about disability services on our campus. We had a program that he was interested in. And so they showed up out of the blue one day. And so I helped them through that process with him getting, registered, getting admitted and then registered for the classes. And then when we got to talking about accommodations, of course, he didn't know what to ask for. He just saying, I just want to take these classes and I need it to be accessible. And so in the mom and I got to talking about him navigating in between, classrooms. And so essentially what we did, we try to keep all of his classes was essentially in the same building, except for one semester he did have to go to a separate building. And then I did link him up with another student who was in both classrooms with him. And so kind of paired him up with somebody. So they were very helpful. And then I got the peer mentor who kind of worked with him in the classroom, but I think they kind of butt heads a little bit because I would show up and the student who needed the accommodation was kind of just sitting to the side, just hanging out, and the peer mentor was essentially doing the majority of the work. And so I had to have that conversation.
The argument you got from the two offices just doesn't hold water.
I know, I didn't think so either. And I'm like,
And I'll give you an example. Many of us have worked with students who need interpreter services. When I was at UNCG, we'd send students to Europe for summer internships. I didn't pay to send an interpreter with them on the plane, put them up in a hotel in southern France or whatever for a month and whatever. You coordinate with the resources in the area, and that South Carolina office could have done that with North Carolina, just like many of our sports teams do as well. When you have an away game and you have a student that's deaf or whatever, you contact your sister agency and you say, I've got a deaf student coming on such and such a date. Can we coordinate the effort, of accommodations that's needed and whatever? I just can't buy it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was in disbelief. I mean, you should have heard me in this office, and I'm like, what, his caseworker's not gonna, she emailed me a name and phone number, and she said, you can try them and see if they're willing to do it. And that was it. She only contacted me about his financial aid. That's all she wanted to talk about, and his grades and schedule and whatnot. But as far as providing accommodations, linking me with anybody, she gave me that one phone number. And the guy in North Carolina, he did try to reach out to some other people, but got no support.
Thank you for your insight. Thank you, everybody, for that. And I think we'll go on to case 3.
Okay, so this is another access case. So we have a student with autism who claims that he needs to record his classes due to being an auditory learner. The accommodation plan includes the ability to record lectures. However, the class is not a lecture-based class, but instead it's an open small group discussion about social disparities and race. The instructor is not lecturing or talking. The class is small, around 7 students, and because of the format of the class, the instructor stated there's no need to record the group discussions due to several reasons, and these were the reasons. Personal or private information may be revealed or discussed. The instructor is not providing any instruction or lecturing. All the information about class assignments, papers, etc. is online. The class is mainly discussing topics for their future papers. The parents are upset that the student is not allowed to record the whole class. Is there ever a case or a reason to record an entire class, in this case, group discussions, against the request of other students or the instructor in the class?
So I picked this one or got this one. And so a couple of questions. We've had some pushback with some of our allied health programs because they say they're talking about cases and there's HIPAA issues. I'm like, there's really not, because we're not providing healthcare. We're just discussing these cases, which could be hypothetical in nature. And my question to them is, what's the difference between a student audio recording lecture or writing down every single thing that's said? If I'm a heavy note taker and I'm taking everything down because that's how I process information and walk out the door, what's the difference here? And so what the reasoning for the student needing to record the class is because of how he's learning the material. So instead of reading all of his information, he is listening to it. If I have a book, I can go back and reread it. I can't go back and re-listen to things unless it's recorded. I think a way I may address this with the instructor, besides pointing out that, like, if people are taking notes, they're walking out with that information, is also to say, well, we can put in a disclaimer or something for the student to sign off on that they understand that this is confidential information and that the rest of the class talk to the class that we're recording this, so they're aware ahead of time. and that they'll delete all the recordings at the end of the module or the session or, you know, whatever time frame so that they can still go back and listen to those pieces. You know, it's a hard one when you're dealing with like an auditory processing situation and they need to be able to go back and listen to that again, because they may, even though they're all talking, they may not understand everything that's being said at that moment because they're taking time to process, and then they're going to miss what this next person said because they're taking time to process. And now they've missed information, which means they're not having equal access to the material everybody else is getting. Another point is if they were vice versa, maybe they're not an auditory processor and we ended up providing a CART service, they're going to get a transcript of that. And so again, where's that barrier? Where's the access for this individual, and making sure that it's equitable for everybody else? Eric?
Eric.
I don't know why I'm so talkative today, but I'm, I guess my thing is, when I was in school, almost everybody had recorders. It was no big deal. And I guess two questions I have: when did it become one? And secondly, is there really a legal precedent that supports that?
No. And I think Tuesday I've had this conversation before too. They're joking themselves if they think they're not being recorded. Right? Like if instructors think that's not happening, they are fooling themselves into a false belief. And I believe North Carolina is a one-party record. So if one person knows it's being recorded, we're good. So yeah, again, they're fooling themselves if they think it's not happening.
So I guess, in other words, when it comes down to it, they can't legally prevent the student from
I
recording.
don't think so. I don't think they can.
No, they
Bruce?
can't. They can't. And I appreciate, but to help alleviate the concerns of the other students in the class, and you touched on it as well too, and so that they don't feel inhibited in talking and participating in the class, there needs to be a little general, education to the class as well. And there needs to be consequences if it's violated too, under student conduct or whatever. I've had examples, not thank God through my office, but on campuses, where students have recorded classes and then they turn around and try to sell it on Craigslist. And that's a problem because then they've gotten into copyright issues and whatever. So educating both the student receiving the accommodation and the class as a whole as to how it will be handled with respect to their individuality and participation in the class too is a big necessity.
Thank you all. Any other comments related to this case?
Tuesday.
Yes, Kent.
I'll add to this that this is Kent. Regardless of, I mean, I agree with what everybody's saying, but I have been involved in situations where people have been adamant that there are no recordings that are going to take place in these cases was clinical settings. And so I approached it from the standpoint of, hey, what we're trying to make accessible to this student is pretty much the note-taking process. In other words, if every other student's allowed to take notes in there, we as an institution have to figure out a way for this student to have equal access to that. And if the way that he normally does that is through recording, we have to look at what alternatives we can provide in lieu of that. And in those cases, once again, we provided a note taker that did the same thing as the other students did in those classes. And 9 times out of 10, usually presenting that position or that argument leads the people to eventually say, okay, it's okay to record it.
Thank you, Kent. Our next case study is again another access related one. We have an 18-year-old student with a traumatic brain injury and some other mental health diagnoses, including some trauma related ones. There is a history of suicide attempts within the past 2 to 4 years. and emotional during certain classes that may trigger them. The student already has typical accommodations like extended time, separate setting, breaks as needing, and etc. We've recently added an accommodation to their plan that states if the student appears to be in emotional distress, they should call the counseling office immediately. Teachers are still struggling with the student as they are appearing as if in emotional crisis at least once a week at the end of class. The student typically removes themselves from the classroom and goes in the hall or the bathroom, but the teacher states the student is disrupting the class and other students. The student is connected to outside services, though not as often as they should be, medication management, and lives with their parents. The parent has a FERPA form on file and is involved as much as they need to be. What other reasonable accommodations might be necessary and or appropriate? The student has regular check-ins with the counselor as well.
So I picked up on this one too. And my first inclination is to ask, is this an otherwise qualified individual? So are they able to meet the academic standards of the class and code of conduct? So if they're disrupting the class, for us, that's a breaking of code of conduct. And I'd want to hear more from the instructor exactly how this individual is disrupting the class when they leave, because that seems a little nebulous and very subjective. You know, if it's just they're getting tired of them getting up and leaving because it's happening so frequently, that's one thing. But if it's their sighing heavily and huffing and puffing and, you know, like being flaily about like while they're leaving, that's a different thing, right? So what exactly is that disruption to the learning environment? I think it's not knowing more about the situation. I feel like it's a lot to put on the counseling office to call whenever he seems in emotional distress, which is frequently. Like that again leads to, is this an otherwise qualified individual? Maybe this is not the time that school is on the counter for you. Maybe this is a time where you really need that more intensive therapy to deal with those holistic life issues and then become back at that point. I mean, giving breaks, all the accommodations, and they're having regular check-ins like that seems like a lot. But again, I know that there's probably way more happening here than we got like in a case study, which because you're limited in your space and time. I feel like there was something else when I talked about this. Diamond, did you have something or? Oh, I can't hear you.
I can't hear
still
either.
not working. Yeah, I can't hear you either. Can you type it? Since the technology is not working, would that be okay? Okay. Bruce, did you have thoughts?
Heather, this is Laura. Can I
was
chime
gonna
in for just a
defer on
second?
this
Oh, I'm sorry.
one, but
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
Bruce
let's do
going.
Laura. Oh,
the
sorry.
nail has been hit on the head, and it's, you have to look at holding every student accountable to appropriate interaction and the institution student code of conduct. And disability is not an excuse for accountability.
Absolutely. Laura, what were you saying?
We actually have this actual event happening on our campus now with a student, and disruption was him coming in and out of the class, slamming the door, coming into class late, talking to some of, he's an older student, so he was talking to some of our early college young girls. It was making them uncomfortable. So it ended up us having a conversation with the parent. She kind of argued it and was not sure that his disruption was actually a disruption, and we said it was. He's coming in late, he's slamming the door, he's getting in the teacher's face. So right now we're in the process of working with our VP and our dean and possibly moving him to an online environment, simply because he's just causing so much disruption in the classroom that students are complaining. He's emailing students, and it's just it's become a situation. So like Bruce said, disability or not disability students, I always tell students and parents, they have to abide by the student code of conduct. We will accommodate, but we will not tolerate with misbehavior for any student regardless.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Diamond put in the chat, instructors are not trained for emotional crisis as well. And don't we all know it? Like anybody's losing their crap and it's like, oh, send them to the counselor. And you're like, they're just feeling their feelings. But yes, it definitely goes to this other extreme of now it's a disruption and it's disrupting the learning environment for other students as well. Yeah. Other thoughts, comments, questions?
Okay, we'll move on to the next one, and this is our last one related to access. So this student is diagnosed with autism with a sensory processing issue and high levels of anxiety and depression, works regularly with OT to manage sensory issues. So dual enrolled students, the student is 17 years old. The requested accommodations were reviewed and approved, extended time on testing, video captioning, copies of instructor notes if they're not provided in Moodle, early access on assignments, extended time in class assignments, the use of a laptop and recording, a break to manage the symptoms in class, and periodic use of earbuds or headphones. The requested accommodation under consideration is due dates for assignments provided in writing when the information is not already in the syllabus or Moodle. The student explained that due to processing challenges, they rely on audio captioning for videos and records with their laptop in class lectures. They explained the importance of remembering and organizing tasks like due dates and by seeing them in writing in addition to hearing them. The quote from this particular individual is, "I can hear someone talking to me, but cannot always process the content in the moment. I've missed due dates that may have been given verbally, only with no way of referring to that due date in writing." I'll open this one up for any discussion.
So I would want more information because I sit here, read this, and it says that she records the lectures in class. So when exactly are they verbally giving due dates out? Because wouldn't she already have that recorded? I guess it depends. Would Otter be a better option? You know, as it would record and also transcribe.
Renee, can you speak a little bit more to that?
On
About
the
Otter?
We actually use Otter. Most of our students rather use it than having an actual note taker. So Otter is, I guess it's like an app that you can log in either on a laptop or on your phone, and it just records in the moment and then it transcribes live, so in real time, and it's actually pretty accurate. And then there's some tools they can use to create notes or outlines from that recording.
Thanks, Renee. Eric,
Yep.
did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was kind of framing this in terms of just helping or training a student to understand that, usually in terms of, time and self-management in general, not necessarily tied to a disability, but, encouraging students to be aware that, hey, your instructor oftentimes is going to give you a module of material and say, you have a week to do this, turn it in by Sunday at midnight, and not really have target due dates for any one part of it, so that you're going to have to spend some time going through the syllabus and learning to write down due dates for yourself. And that would, I guess, the disconnect there for me would be the instructor should be providing it one way or the other. whether it's the whole kit and caboodles do it at the same time or some separate assignment. And could that not be just a reminder of some kind that we're referring to? So that would be where I'd want to clarify. Because ultimately, the student is responsible for, knowing what's due and when it's due.
So, this is Kent. Is there all the student is really requesting is an assignment schedule with submission deadlines. Is that what I'm hearing you say, that's what they're requesting?
Yes.
Okay, and so, here at where I teach, we've been for many, many years, we've been required to always have an assignment schedule with submission deadlines for all of our assignments from day one. Is that not a general requirement at most institutions, or is this just kind of done? Evidently not if he's having to request it.
No, I don't think it's across the board. I think in a perfect world, that's best practice. I was just thinking also, as just processing through this, that the student may also be used to the public school setting where the teachers are required to write down their assignments for them. Like, here's what's due and when it's due, and give it to them as part of their IEP or 504. And this is one of those transition pieces to college where that's not going to happen at the collegiate level. And I will say, probably for us, a good portion of our teachers do have it in Moodle, have it on the syllabus. And they also have a caveat on there, like dates and changes are subjects to change, like that's happening. So, yeah, I think that question, where I kind of was thinking through this is, if they're relying on like captioning, is CART a better system for them, or Otter, like what, or Glean? Erica put that in the comments as well. Is something like that where it's captioning everything? Is that a better system for this individual versus relying on auditory information?
See, I'm somewhat confused again, because in one second we're talking about auditory information and then we're talking about written information. I think as long as the student has a condition and the documentation supports the need for having material in a written format, any institution would be hard pressed to explain why they turned down a request to make sure the student had all of their assignments submission deadlines in a written format. That would just, I don't see how we could defend saying no to that.
And in this particular case, the student really is requesting both, is the way I read it. They're really wanting the written and the auditory. So it's a hard one.
Yeah, that might make some differences if they're requesting it in both formats.
Yeah. Great conversation. I'll move on. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say one more thing. In those cases, if there's like a shift or a change of date or, something along those lines, could the accommodation be worded such that if changes in schedule occur apart from the syllabus, instructors should send out a written announcement versus solely relying on a verbal announcement?
Yeah, I think that would be
best practice.
Yeah. Kent took the words right out of my mouth. I think that would be best practice, and that would meet the needs of all the students in the class, not just the one that we're talking about. Okay, I know we're getting short on time, but we'll try to get through maybe at least one of the attendance and absence cases. So the first one here is, when is it appropriate to give students an extension on turning in homework assignments after the due date as an accommodation? We've had students requesting at least 2 to 3 days extra for turning in their homework assignments. Typically, these students have diagnoses of ADD, ADHD, depression, and/or anxiety. Outside of a letter from a doctor or a licensed professional requesting this, What additional information needs to be provided or stated to determine this accommodation? Side note, some of these students complain when they are behind on their assignments, or they complain whether the teacher gives them access to the assignments early so they are in line with the original due dates of the class.
Woo, right? I think extended time on assignments is one of those that we all hate to work with faculty or anybody with, just because it's harder to provide. I know at Davis and Davy, we have 8-week courses sometimes where it's not whole 16 weeks. And assignments come quick fire, and giving extended time on assignments isn't helpful to the student, right? So honestly, in making that decision, it's a lot of professional discretion, if that makes sense. When I think about this answer, I think about, well, what the class is the student in? How many assignments does this class really have? There's a document that I want to say Monica gave me a long time ago that is like the 7 questions that a faculty should ask themselves if a student should get extended time on assignments, or it was something like that, or absences, frequent absences or extended time on assignments. And I give those 7 questions to the faculty, be like, hey, I'm looking at doing this for your class. Can you answer these questions for me? And it helps sometimes it doesn't, let me say that. And so, yeah, this is just not one that is easy to make a decision, but the documentation matters, the class that the student is taking matters, how quick the class is, how many assignments the class had, the class has. There are a lot of components to think about before just saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead and give this as an accommodation. Are there alternative accommodations that would meet the access of this student instead of that particular extended time on assignments? And so that's how I look at this. I am free to anyone else in their comments on this. I saw Heather's hand.
I think somebody else had their hand raised before me, but I don't know who.
I think it was Gloria.
I just have a question. I mean, could this be a time management issue, or, because I mean, I'm not seeing necessarily. I would have to see some more information, because if most instructors give assignment, dates and deadlines and all that stuff in their syllabus, and they normally give more time than it would take for a student to. Now, I mean, I understand on tests they're timed and all of that stuff, and but for these extensions, okay, if you give them 2 to 3 days extra, okay, so what if then that's not enough, and then we start going and they come back and ask for more time. It just seems like a slippery slope, and it looks like this would be maybe students where in another setting, K through 12, they are given all of these extra, time frames and stuff like that. But, in college, you do have to get to a point where you can, manage your time to where you can get things done in a timely manner. So, I mean, maybe I'm thinking holding them accountable for some things that maybe they shouldn't be. I don't know.
I agree with you completely, Gloria. I generally, when I see ADHD as the diagnosis and extended time on assignments, I'm like, we're dealing with time management more than anything else. And you're right, they do get that extra time in public school, and that shift to college. They're like, but why? One of the things I would ask specifically is, what's the barrier that the extra time is going to remove? If it's a time management issue, then it's not removing a barrier. It's actually creating another barrier for the student now to have to overcome. Also, how many classes are they taking? And we get a ton of students who are like, oh, I'm taking 5 classes because that's what my advisor told me. And we have conversations all the time about, you don't have to take 5 classes. Maybe you should only take 2 or 3 classes. And that's a hard transition for them as well, is just to understand that this is a very different world than high school, and you're not necessarily going to be able to handle the course load that you would have in high school because this is college now. So, I mean, those are the key things I would look at is what's the barrier and what's given that time, what's going to do. The other thing is it sounds like they're wanting it for every assignment, and that's not the intention for extended time on assignments either. That's meant to be when there's an unexpected flare-up of symptoms. That's why it's removing that kind of barrier. And these things are expected, right? Like depression, anxiety, you may have flare-ups. And I think more documentation would definitely be needed in that situation. But this situation with the ADHD sounds way more like time management pieces as well. So barrier, how many classes, like we got to think a little bit more holistically about what's reality and what's reasonable.
Excellent point on the number of classes, 15, 18 credits, especially in your first semester in college. And then on top of it, because they're not used to the world of college and their classes are only on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So they're working 30 to 35 hours a week on a job as well, too. They have contributed to the situation of anxiety.
Alex, did
I'll
you
add
have
to it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead, Kent.
I was just going to say I'll add to this whole conversation. I agree with what everybody is saying. That the two biggest things I was advised to be careful about is one, indicating in any way that we have a blanket policy where we're going to say no to requests for extensions to submission deadlines. However, I was also told be extremely careful about how you venture down that path, because once you start down it, it's difficult to say no in most every situation. And we here at where I'm at, we have tried our best to lean towards the whole thing of, if this is a condition that's episodic in nature and you can show us where this flare-up occurred, we work on an individual basis with individual instructors and usually for individual assignments to facilitate that process. And in short, that's what I was told we're expected to do. We're expected to be able to demonstrate how we engaged in the interactive process to address the student's request. And if we're going to work with the student and talk about extension to submission deadlines, it's always important to make them aware of the fact that we have to be able to draw a direct connection in between the condition and the accommodation being requested. And in a lot of these cases, it's extremely difficult to rule out other variables that could contribute to their not being able to get things done, like working 35 hours a week, like having kids, like having sports activities to be involved in, or even like taking too many classes at one time when they're not able to manage the requirements of those classes.
Thank you for that, Kent. Alex, did you have anything else to follow up on? I saw your hand raised.
Well, I just kind of had this at the very end of the semester, right? We're winding down the semester. I had a student who sent me an email yesterday that says, I hope you're doing well. I just found out from my mother my accommodations were not very clear regarding the time on tests. It was supposed to include assignments too. Is there a way that you can tweak that small error and inform my instructor? And so I just kind of crafted out a response. Thank you for touching base. I told her extended time typically applies to testing at college level. And if she has a concern about specific assignments, that would include time to complete it, that she would talk to her instructor to discuss the concern, because she needs the open conversation to find out what, as somebody said, the students' barriers and how they can work together for a successful solution. Of course, the interactive process, I agree, there may be students that have some significant issues that might warrant a special accommodation to address that. I have students who have, psychotic breaks who may be out, and we work very well on that. But I just thought it was interesting. And she didn't respond to my email, but I saw her later in the hallway and I said, hey, did you get my email? How's it going? She said, yeah, I got it. It's okay. It's all right. I'll work through it. So sometimes that they immediately send something and then they kind of step back and realize that it's not going to happen, just like that. And that was never anything on the request and the application that we even talked about. So I thought that was really interesting.
Well, wonderful conversation, everyone. I know that we're at the 3 o'clock hour. We got through about half of our case studies, so I feel pretty good about that. We will send out another invite. Trudy and I will get together and get a time and get that out to everyone after our graduations, is what I would imagine, because I know that we're all in the midst of moving towards that. I see a couple of questions here in the chat that I did want to follow up on. There was one question: can faculty request a doctor's note when requested if they have an ET as an accommodation already? The answer to that is no. All of the documentation is housed in the disability service offices, and then we communicate the accommodations out. There was a question about the 7 questions. I think, Demetri, you mentioned about that. If you want to share those with Trudy, I'm sure that she would be happy to send those out to the group. And I think other people just saying thanks, have to go, another meeting. Just making sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, so I think that's all. Thanks again for joining us. I love the candid conversations with everybody and getting connected. Anything else, Trudy?
I can't think of anything, but I just very much appreciate everybody adding to this event or this experience, because it's very helpful to hear from some new people and some veterans that have been in the field for a while, and to share that experience so that we can all learn from each other. So it was a wealth of information. And Demetri, you knew as soon as you opened your mouth and said you had something from Monica, you knew I was going to share it. Might as well have just sent it on over to me. But
Don't
no, I really
forget-
appreciate this. Went well.
Yeah, great. Don't forget about Disability in a Day. We hope to see you all in person at Central Piedmont. The registration link's there. I know that Trudy's going to send that back out, which has more information about hotels and then also Trudy's resources at the system offices. Those links are in the meeting chat.
Great. Everybody have a wonderful day, and
Thank you.
well done. Well done. Thank you so much. Applause to the board members. Tuesday, great job. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for contributing.